All right, let's get started. Happy New Year. Welcome to the January 2023 OpenZFS leadership meeting. A couple things on the agenda for today. The first one was from Rob N. I'm not sure if you're on the call, but he was looking for reviews or feedback on his pull request about cha-cha encryption. Are you here, Rob?
I don't see him. He's from Australia, so the time zone might be difficult.
Okay. It looks like Jorgen took a look and Richard would have had a comment. Richard Yao. That was just kind of meta, right? Yeah, I don't really have enough context to comment on the material of it. We'll see if we can find some reviewers. Anybody interested in encryption? Looks like this algorithm, he's saying it's used a lot on lower powered machines.
Yeah, I think on machines that don't have accelerated AES, it's better. It's I think also the default for what OpenSSH uses for the same reason.
Does anybody know, is this like breathing new life into encryption in ZFS? Like, do we have users now that are like, that would be great if we had like people actually starting to use this more than.
Well, there's a good number of people using it.
And they're stumbling over some problems, although so far haven't been able to isolate it down to much specific. And every time it seems like we do, the error message changes to something, like the crash changes to something completely different.
Yeah, I think that the next topic on the agenda actually is related to that, about kind of stability of encryption in general.
Yeah, it looks like the gang block change that I think you made recently, Matt, helped with some of that. And that reminds me of a separate thing. Some number of months ago, a change was made so that we don't try as hard to avoid having gang blocks. And a few of our customers have noticed that on RAID Z 2 and 3 pools, getting a lot more gang blocks kind of unnecessarily, and they have to change the tunable to make it go back to trying harder before resorting to gang blocks. Otherwise, really space inefficient. I don't know. That's not really related to the encryption, but it just reminded me when I was thinking that your fix for the detection of encryption on gang blocks does seem to have helped in some of the cases we're seeing of people running into panics from encryption. But I also wonder if it's related to, are we making a lot more gang blocks than we ever meant to since that change, and maybe not noticing? Do we keep, is there an easy way to get any stats on how often we've created gang blocks? Even just like, do we have runtime counters for it or anything?
I think if they would do a scrub, you have counters, but I don't know if they're.
Didn't Alexander turn those counters off?
Oh, I disabled them, but code is still there. Just no interface to read them. You would need to detrace or something.
Yeah, I don't remember if I wanted to or did add a like runtime count of number of gang blocks created.
I don't see one currently.
Okay. Yeah, that would be a nice addition. It will allow us to quantify the,
Yeah,
potential
are we
that you're talking
creating
about.
more of them than we think we should be? I think the one we were investigating, the initial report was null pointer dereferences in like LZ4 decompress. But they kind of, when we enabled assertions and so on, it tended to panic in other places much sooner. But it would seem that the raw ABD pointer would get changed to null at some point and not contain the data anymore when the buffer was in the state where it should contain the raw ABD still. But we haven't managed to track that one down. They've started hitting one where when they use a clone for Docker, the mmap isn't working properly. I think there's a different PR about this issue. I don't know that it's necessarily related to encryption, but an assertion fails about the mmap and ZFS copies of the data being in sync. And it's, I think, partly derailing our attempts to narrow down the encryption bug because we're running into other bugs. But mostly so far we don't have a great use case for, triggering the encryption problem on demand. And it sounds a little related to what some Illumos people found, specifically having to do with clones. So we're gonna dig into that direction of it and see. Because I think the other place people reported a lot of problems was send receive. And when you do a send receive, there's a clone that happens under the hood, right? Temporarily for the temporary hidden data set or whatever.
Yeah, like when you're receiving.
Yeah, you receive into a clone and then swap it later. So yeah, I wonder if that might be the thread that we need to tug on and see if that brings a bunch of these kind of disparate issues all together.
Cool. Yeah, Michael, thanks for sharing. There's a spreadsheet that lists the various encryption bugs. It kind of tries to categorize them. So this kind of gets to Rich's question about like, is native encryption like, do we think that it's really good enough and ready for prime time? Or do we need to like kind of add some official warnings around it? I don't really have a good answer around that either. I don't use it day to day. I haven't been following the issues super closely either. But definitely open to folks' ideas or feedback on kind of the state of encryption and how well it works or does not.
Similar to what Alan was saying, I hope my mic's working. Good, thank you. Similar to what Alan was saying, I was trying to look at a bug that somebody reported about encryption, where you can end up with an embedded block pointer record on an encrypted data set. So that's good. And that works fine right up until you try to do anything with it. And then the code goes, what? And I tried to reproduce that, and I accidentally reproduced a different bug, which was about the point at which I thought I'd bring this up today, because it was like, oh, there are sufficiently many bugs that if I try to reproduce one, I may accidentally hit another. That seems problematic. I understand that a lot of people are using it fine and it works great for them, and that's great. But if you have a 1% chance of being jumped by a lion, it's still probably worth warning people if there was no lion risk before, metaphorically.
Yeah, I mean, data loss is very bad, right? So I think that if we have some data loss problems with encryption, then we should be taking those very seriously and trying to address them. And if that's not possible, then putting some guardrails around the use of that feature to mitigate the impact. I don't really have enough details personally to make a call on that right now.
Yeah.
Alexander, do you have a sense of how many TrueNAS users are using native encryption?
I don't have any statistics, but it's widely announced, and we switch from FreeBSD to Linux. We should migrate to native encryption unless somebody want to use SED on disk encryption. So numbers should grow, but I don't think we have statistics on exact numbers.
I think you were saying at the summit that you hadn't seen anyone reporting problems with it, though, weren't you? If I'm recalling right.
Oh yeah, obviously I heard from a few developers that everything bad is and terrible, but on other side, I don't have any huge stoppers reports or anything that would tell that it's more broken than not. It's kind of working, and we are creating some minor PRs polished here and there. What I think one was just opened last week, so it's mostly working. Maybe there are some corruption somewhere, but again, we have no reproduction or specific reports.
And as far as I know, there have been no reports of crashes on FreeBSD, and that seems weird.
At least the one that you're investigating, Alan, seems like a really narrow, to me, race. So I'm not entirely surprised something with a very different scheduling system has different properties for triggering it.
Right.
For that one. I could try one of the ones that I think I know that I have a reliable reproducer for, which is not a crash, but just it screws up setting the key. And I would bet that will work on FreeBSD, but I haven't tried it. But you're right. That's true. Well, there's the Illumos issue, which I guess could be unrelated technically. The stack trace is the same, so I'd be really surprised, but.
Well, I think it was specifically one of the Illumos issues I was looking at. They had a reliable reproducer, but it didn't reproduce using their reproducer on Linux or BSD, only
Correct.
on Illumos.
The same failure mode seems to be happening, but it doesn't seem to reliably
reproduce the same way.
Yeah. What happens for them, if I recall, and in my experience for us, is that when we go to update the user accounting data on the data set.
Right, so that one was only able to be triggered if you were receiving a send stream from a pool old enough to not have that activated already?
You can reproduce it reliably doing that, because then you can force the ZFS upgrade whenever you want.
Right.
It still happens if that's not true. Like that is, I believe, what happens with the bug that you're investigating is when it goes to trigger the recomputation of that, it goes and touches everything. And that's how you do the recalculation. And when it touches object 0, it somehow gets into a state where it's trying to do a write at the same time as it's trying to access it elsewhere. And part of the write path it takes is that it sets the ABD to 0, or null, the contents of the ABD rather. And then, if you access it while that's true, bang goes the dynamite.
Okay, I think that sounds like one of the panics we're seeing with debug enabled is during, I think it's ARC release, that the IO in progress isn't false. And so it sounds like we suspected something with the ref counting where something is still using this buffer and IO is in progress, but we're trying to free it at the same time.
Yeah. That seems consistent with what my expectation is for that.
Okay.
So at least in my experience, if you force user counting off, you can't reproduce it. But that's not necessarily useful for everyone who wants to use that.
Right. Can you force it off once it's already on, or?
I had a patch to do that, but if I
Okay.
recall, the user who tried it reported other problems.
Okay.
With the patch. Just forcing it off doesn't have problems.
Right.
But that seems to be what was happening, is that it tries dirtying it, and it thinks the ref count is 0 when it's not, and does something unfortunate.
Okay.
But in any case, I don't know what I'd phrase a warning like for this, right? Like, see if you are affected by this list of known issues. Don't use ZFS send. But with how many people are using it without a problem, it seems odd to put a warning of don't use this, and would probably get a lot of questions. But I'm not sure anything less is accurate enough. I don't know. I don't have statistics. I just know that people keep coming in and asking me questions about it being broken in various ways.
You are the world expert.
God help us. But I just wanted to possibly put something like, you may wish to see if you're affected by one of these known issues, with a pointer to something in the docs listing a couple of the more easily hittable ones. Or, something like around dedupe was the original vision of like, think carefully before turning this on. But
Yeah.
I tend to disagree. In case of dedupe, problems are clearly known because they're growing from design.
yeah,
If we have problems with encryption, it's a bug that should be fixed. And just telling there are bugs, like there are dragons, it won't help anybody with anything. It won't help with debugging. It won't solve the problem. It won't do anything. It's just bad publicity, and that's all.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Alexander. The issues, like, it's hard to write something that says like, oh, see if you're affected by these bugs, but then like the bugs aren't narrowly constrained. They aren't like, oh, if you're, doing encryption and encrypted replication, and you've turned off, some weird flags, and okay, then don't do that. But if it's just like you have, all that we know is like sometimes the machine panics and they're using ZFS encryption. We haven't really narrowed it down like that much. Then it's not that helpful to tell people, unless we're just going to say, don't use ZFS encryption. Like, we put it behind some flag or something, and it's not enabled by default anymore, which is, it's tough because, the cat's already out of the bag, right? People are using it.
Yep.
So that is not a great solution. Obviously, the best solution is fixing the bugs. But, we need people that know enough about it and care enough about it and have the time to spend on it. And I think, unfortunately, like the original authors and maybe also other folks working at that company are not super active anymore in the community. So, we need to like find some new experts, find people who are willing to put in the time to learn about this subsystem.
You mentioned IX systems
sorry,
now.
George.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think you should go.
I was just going to ask, like, IX systems now supports encryption. Is that a relatively new feature?
Well, it's in the web UI since I don't remember when, but a couple of years probably. But
Okay.
again, we added it in parallel to existing software on disk encryption, and we also in all our enterprise systems we have by default sell full disk encryption drives, so it's not used in 100% cases, but it's in web UI. It's not behind any license or anything. Like anybody install through NAS at home can start using it. It's like there are no any gates for quite a while.
Okay.
Alexander, do you know anything about the quality assurance steps that go specifically towards encryption?
Within IX?
Yeah, within IX.
Honestly, I don't know. I didn't dive so much into our QE to say what exactly tested. But obviously, there are some basic things of all the creation things, replication things, and those are obviously tested. But I suppose this happens in some rare cases under some workloads. We are not doing a lot of benchmarks under encryption, because for anybody who care about performance, we just recommend the CD drives, since they cost the same but don't have performance problems.
Thank you.
So I think, currently we're kind of at a progress on this has stalled a little bit, it sounds like. Understandably, IX might be using this, but they aren't experiencing the problems. Maybe their customers are using it in a way that's different than the people who are reporting problems are using it. So, I understand them not wanting to like put a lot of resources into something that's not a problem for their use case. So
Clara is investigating one specific issue for a specific customer related to this, and hopefully we'll find something, and maybe it'll solve everybody's problem, but I'm not going to promise that. But we're looking at one specific cause of this, although every time we poke at it, it moves. So we're not sure which subset of the problems will be solved by getting to the root cause of this, the specific one that we're investigating now.
Well, I mean, that's better than nothing.
Yes.
It's great that you guys are looking into something. Is there a bug that's related to that, or is this just
there's a PR somewhere, I forget. It's our customer joined an existing one because they had about the same stack trace, and then they also got about 6 different stack traces from their fleet of machines. I think they have something like 100 machines running 2.0 or 2.1, and they seem to get 2 or 3 panics a week. And so we're poking at that, trying to figure out what's going on there. But I find the other one that's the mmap related one is a separate issue and is hampering us a little bit.
And are those ones the data loss ones, or it's just like a panic?
No, there's just a panic and then reboot and everything's okay.
To be clear, to the best of my knowledge, the closest you get to a data loss bug with this currently is that sometimes it will set the key for the data set incorrectly. So it will change what key the metadata says it's encrypted with without rekeying it. So the next time you try to unlock it, it fails. Other than any sort of just general consequences of panicking in the middle of doing something, I don't recall seeing any that actually caused data loss more than what I just described.
Okay. So it sounds like the data loss may be slightly, the claim of data loss may be somewhat overblown, or like, maybe I shouldn't, that's like,
Well, I think the
that
Illumos
word, but
bug,
like,
they specifically found a problem, but
That's
no
true.
one's been able to recreate that on Linux, so I don't know.
That's true. The Illumos bug, they did say that the metadata ended up horribly mangled after it happened sometimes. That is true.
all right. And then this one where the metadata about the key got changed incorrectly. Is that this one, issue number 11294?
Let me,
Issue mounting encrypted data sets, corrupting metadata?
there's one that I had, let's see, 11294, you said?
Yes. I'm just looking at the spreadsheet. That was kind of the
Yeah.
closest I saw to what you described.
There's, I believe, been a couple reports that are probably what I just described with a couple different ways. There's a very good reproducer for it, so it should be
Okay.
demonstratable. I also, there was another one that sort of had overlap in the failure mode that it looked like, where it wouldn't unlock, but it was a different problem. Where it didn't update the MAC for the user accounting metadata correctly. So I added a patch that just throws it out if that happens, because we can just recalculate it. Who cares?
That one's fixed now, right? Yeah.
That's correct. I think 11294 was the one that I just had the PR for. I believe, because it was.
Yeah, because this was just marked, well, this is marked as completed about a year ago.
Yeah, it got a fix merge that caused the problem that I just had a PR for. So it got reverted for that reason.
Okay.
Then it got revised and still had that problem. So I then had a PR, and now so far it hasn't had a problem again.
Okay, so that one's okay. So the whatever issues remain with the dataset mounting are,
Let me
I
go.
don't know which ones those are.
Yeah, I should make that clear.
Especially if there's a reproducer, that seems like something that we could, you know, address more easily than some of these other
Yes.
ones.
I can find this offline if it's going to take more than a second or two, but that's right. That's it. 12614, I believe, is the one that I'm thinking of. It basically, if you change key a child and then receive it back, it resets the parent's key without rekeying it. Is a summary from my recollection of how this works, but
Yeah, well, maybe this is, you know, the list of bugs is long and
yes,
maybe a little daunting, but
I can
this one
triage
seems
it.
like,
That's fine.
but this one seems like it would, like, it's kind of a sweet spot of there's a reproducer, and it's the severity is, you know, it results in you not being able to access your data. So that's very bad. So fixing this one might be both possible or plausible and, you know, high impact.
I have a workaround for it that I need to finish cleaning up, because there is a force change key operation half plumbed in right now. So if you know the key that you need to reset it to, you can do that.
Yeah, that would be kind of a way out of this.
Yes.
But is there a way to avoid getting into this to begin with?
Probably. I mean, I would assume you can just discard change key operations from a receive.
Yeah. That would
But-
make sense, probably.
Well, no, because if you're doing send-w, that does matter, doesn't it? But it's probably just not applying it at the right level.
Yeah, like it so when you do the change key, I'm trying to remember how this all works. It's changing the, yeah, it obviously isn't changing all the data that's already there. It's changing the wrapping key, right?
Yeah. What happens here is it says it has changed the wrapping key, but doesn't. Well, specifically, it updates the parent's wrapping key to have a different ID, but doesn't actually re-encrypt it or something to that effect.
All right.
So forcibly resetting the metadata allows you to get back at your data.
Got it. Yeah.
So what it should be doing is, I think, breaking, because this happens if you break the encryption root relationship on the child and then incrementally send it back. And then it rewrites the parent.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like this is just like some kind of logic bug with, you know, receiving an incremental on a child where a change key has happened and the change key is currently like inherited from the parent. It needs to realize that, oh, now the child has a different key. We're putting that new, you know, wrapped key in the child, but not changing the parent.
The part of the problem might be that you might not necessarily know that you might not have enough data to distinguish the two.
To know that that's happening, yeah.
Yeah. Like the send stream might not have enough data to tell you that it's just the child whose keys changed.
Yeah. So we might have to add something like that.
But if you're just receiving the child, you can presumably ignore it if it tells you to rekey the parent, because that would be bad.
Yeah.
Well, no, because you could have rekeyed the parent on the other side. Damn it. Wait, no, because you don't want to. Yeah, you can do it. That's fine, I think.
Well, you know, if you or anybody else wants to work on this and wants to like, I'm available to talk through like, you know, how the encryption, or sorry, how the send and receive stuff works, and like how we might need to, how we could change the format of that to include additional information if we need to. So
Right.
feel free to contact me offline if you
I'll
want.
see if I can carve out some time for it. I've had trouble carving out time to work on anything recently, but we'll see. This should be, hopefully, fairly simple to resolve. This one, at least. I think there are other cases that trigger something similar, but this is the one I have with a ready reproducer.
I'm still invested in encryption and I use it quite heavily, but and I'm willing to help. But every time I look at issue tickets, they're always raw send and not encryption. So I don't. All the problems you guys talk about having encryption isn't encryption. It seems to be raw send, which I don't know anything about. Sending is, you know, ugly code, if I may be so blunt. Whereas encryption I consider to be quite nice.
You can trigger at least some of them without doing a raw send if you're receiving to an encrypted data set.
Yeah, I would still classify that as send receive as opposed to encryption.
Right. Whereas
It's
the
at
one
the
I linked in
intersection
the,
of encryption and send receive.
Yeah.
but like
So-
the issue 12775 is just reading data from an encrypted data set.
And no send receive with it? Just,
Correct. No send receive.
Yeah,
There's some cloning going on, but that's
I'd like
unrelated.
to help with that. Yeah.
But yeah, they have, I think, 15 different stack traces that have come up on that one. It's a bit weird.
I think I would guess that one is probably the same. Well, it's the same thing, right? You're ref counting it wrong, and then it just depends on who dereferences the null buffer.
Who ends up trying to poke the null and where it explodes. Yeah.
All right, there's a couple more items on the agenda. What other thoughts do folks have on encryption? Right. Well, if not, then we'll leave it there for now. The next issue on the agenda is an mmap issue. Yes. That Mark, the Ubuntu guy, filed. I don't know if he's here.
Yeah, and the customer investigating the encryption problems for ran into this, where I think they're running Google Chrome in a Docker container. So Docker's doing a clone and then firing up Google Chrome, and then Chrome's panicking, trying to read the executable when it tries to mmap it, and the page up to date macro returns false. And somehow, basically, the mmap copy and ZFS's copy of the data don't think they're the same.
Yeah, that sounds bad, obviously.
Yeah.
So the issue, it's is the issue, I see there's like the last comment that you noted was a panic.
Yeah, but basically when debug is enabled and we actually have the assertions, then it goes off.
Right, because the we're doing like a read syscall. Is that right? Yeah, we're doing a read syscall, and then it thinks that the read syscall, normally it should be getting the if the data is mmapped, then that might have been modified, so it needs to read the data from there instead of from the arc.
Mm-hmm.
But this assertion is saying like page up to date is saying that the page is the same, like it's basically, it's not dirty, the page isn't dirty. Yeah, got it. But we had, I guess, presumably determined that it was, I'm not familiar with this code. We must have already thought that we didn't need to do this, and that's why we had the verify.
But yeah, it looks from the initial report, it looked like if debug wasn't on, then it would not detect this and just return the incorrect data.
Yeah. But with debug on, it's like the page up to date is out of sync with something else, or kind of disagrees with something else that we made the check based on. I don't have the code handy. Let's see. I'm just bringing up the code to see. All right. So it's from, so mapped read does find lock page, and then if it finds it, then it says assert page up to date. Right. Find lock page. That must be something from Linux kernel.
It looks like like in update underscore pages, we set page up to date flag. I don't know if we ever unset it or how that works. Yeah, when a file is memory mapped, we must keep the IO data synchronized between the DMU cache and the memory map pages. So on write, if we find a memory map page, we write to both the pages and the DMU buffer.
Yeah. And then when we read, it should be reading from the page if it's mmap, because there could have been stores to the page that we don't know about yet. I'm not sure what this means, what the page up to date actually means in this case. It's like some bit associated with the page, but I don't know what the meaning is and why this assertion is valid here. Because we do the find block page, presumably that's like find the page pointer if this is mmapped. And then we're reading from there, which is like, okay, that sounds right. I'm not sure what the page up to date means. Like if the page is not up to date, what does that mean?
The Linux documentation seems to suggest it means it's dirty. Specifically that every byte in the page is at least as up to date, or sorry, every byte in the page is at least as new as the corresponding one on disk. So it specifically means that we haven't, I think, had an update elsewhere and not filled it in.
Yeah, so it's not that it's dirty, like there have been stores that haven't been written to the file system, but rather there might have been like writes to the file that aren't reflected in the page, which shouldn't normally be the case, because like you were saying, when we do the write, then we always, write to the page as well. And then set
the only place in ZFS where we call clear page up to date is from ZPL read page common, which is only used to support mmap. There will be identical copies of data in the ARC, which is kept up to date via write and write page. Yeah, this one's very Linux specific, so I'm not much help.
Yeah, seems like there's some more digging to do here to understand like what exactly all of these terms mean and do in terms of the interaction with the Linux kernel. And hopefully this page up to date thing is the page up to date panic is the same as the issue with returning the wrong data. Since obviously that's like the page up to date thing is a lot more of a clue as to what's going on.
Yeah, it looks like they have a reproducer with Docker and some set of instructions for even doing it without Docker.
Cool. Well, I mean, I agree. Did you put this on the agenda?
Yeah, I put the link in there because we were talking about it so that people watching the video later will be able to find the link.
Yeah. Well, in any case, I agree. This is an interesting and important bug. Any volunteers to continue taking a look at this? Right. We will hope that one turns up before the next meeting. The last thing on the agenda is a question about the on-disk format document. If there's been any effort to update it. I don't know of any efforts to update it. I posted it on GitHub, including the source, so that it's available for folks who want to work on updating it, but I don't know if anyone's taken that up.
Okay, I don't remember where it came up, but I recall there was some effort or some interest in updating it, and I was always curious about the results of that, because I've used it to write a little bit of software to kind of examine a ZFS volume I had trouble with, and that document was really useful, but I didn't know whether or not it was current or if could use some. Anyway, that's it. So I was always just curious about what happened with that. So can you point me to where it is in GitHub?
Yeah, I'll post it on the chat.
Yeah, I imagine that might have been useful when Mark Johnson from FreeBSD created ZFS support in our makeFS tool. I also wonder if that'd be interesting to anybody here. You can take a directory full of files and as a non-root user be able to create a zpool image where you can lay out the data sets and it'll copy all the files and basically write a whole ZFS file system, but without the ZFS kernel module or anything.
I've done maybe not something exactly like that, but I was working on something similar using Go to create and read CFS volumes, and so that document was really, really helpful.
Yeah, I posted the link in the chat. It's on my GitHub.
Got it.
I added it to the doc.
Cool, thanks. The doc, I mean, it should be accurate, but not complete, because it's 15 plus years out of date. So, it should get you somewhere, but if you're using newer on-disk formats, then there's additional stuff that's not in the document.
Is it possible to, do we know what sort of things are, what kind of gaps there are in it and what things that need to be updated? Or
yeah,
I mean,
I think that this was written very early on, so maybe like version 1.0, version 1 or 2 or 3 on this format. So you can look at what all the changes were since then, and see kind of which ones are relevant to whatever you're trying to do with it. So if you are not, some of the stuff is like, we added DRAID. Okay, well, if you're not reading DRAID, then you don't need to worry about that. We added, a bunch of metadata that kind of describes additional things. If you're just trying to get to the user data, you may not care about that. So, as a kind of academic or completeness exercise, you could go through every one of the on-disk format changes and then, figure out what needs to be added to the document based on that. Or if you're just interested in in my use case, I want to be able to do X, you could probably quickly go through each of the changes and see if it's relevant to, the kinds of pools that you're trying to access, or, if you're just doing read only, then there's a lot of stuff that you wouldn't care about, for example.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. That's all I have.
Cool. And is anybody aware? I mean, I remember people asking about and talking about updating it, but does anybody know if anyone's followed up on that?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, not that I know of either. I just wanted to make sure that we got the question out there in case.
So I think the biggest differences will be stuff like the space map log and so on, right?
Yeah, that was so long ago that I forgot about it, but yeah, space map log and other stuff. And again, that kind of stuff is not necessarily needed if you just want to read an existing pool, read user data from an existing pool, because that's kind of like metadata that you would need to understand to be able to make changes. Or if you wanted to like kind of print everything out for completeness sake.
So my instinct is to want to volunteer for such a thing, but I think what I'd like to do is actually see if I can do anything before I commit to doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it.
Cool. Okay, I think that's the end of the items on the agenda. Any other topics before we call it a meeting?
Very briefly, the make-fs-t ZFS that Alan mentioned is indeed working, and it allows one to cut out a whole bunch of steps when quickly, hopefully testing, say, native encryption. So I've been using it pretty heavily this last week, and I'm impressed.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very useful for things like I want to make a bootable VM that has a ZFS root file system or whatever, and be able to just take all these files and check them in an image file.
And those images are hardware bootable because FreeBSD is quite flexible on be it UEFI or BIOS.
Mhm.
And I'm finding it very useful for testing the current branch of FreeBSD.
What is it written in?
C.
Oh, okay, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I think originally I was going to try to use libzpool and so on, but Mark quickly just did the bare minimum to be able to create a readable pool.
Cool. All right, thanks everyone. Next meeting will be in 4 weeks, which is actually January 31st. So we'll have 2 meetings this month, and it'll be at the same time, 1 p.m. Pacific. See y'all later.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.